Durin had hardly raised a new force when it was called into battle in the far north against a cold, adapted lizard army. As the enemy neared, Durin could see a number of small units of small and medium lizards, with 4 huge monstrosities roaming around. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Obsidian Anubis, and I'm back with another 9th Age battle report. This is Game 2 of the OFCC tournament that was held up here at the end of July, up in the Pacific Northwest. And once more, I'm taking my Pale Company, which is a Empire of Sonstal list, and this time I'm playing Saurian Ancients. So let's go and look at the armies. So my opponent brought Saurian Ancients, so on the far left they have a block of 10 Saurus Warriors with the Jaguar, so they have +1 movement. Next to them is 2 Spearbacks. Then behind them is 15 Skinks with a Skink Priest of Druidism. And then in the very far right of this picture you can kind of see just the base of a Salamander, but there's 2 Salamanders there. And then on my opponent's right flank he has 2 more Spearbacks, another block of 10 Saurus Warriors with Jaguar, another block of 15 Skinks with a Skink Priest of Shamanism. Over there was also a Stegosaur, and a Taurosaur with a giant bow. And then on the far right is 2 regular Connoisseurs. One is the BSB, the green one, and then the blue one is the General. And there's also 5 Chameleons there in the water. There's also 5 Chameleons on the far left side of the battlefield, but I didn't get a picture of those. As you can see, this is the diagonal deployment. And then for secondary objectives for this game, every turn we drew 3 cards, and each card had an objective like complete a 10-inch charge or get a unit into your opponent's deployment zone. And so at the beginning of every turn you picked one of the 3 cards to try to achieve, and you discarded the other 2. So if we look at my list, so again I have a brush and fluff video number 7 which goes into my list in more in detail, but I'll just give a brief summation here. So on the far right I have my Vanguarded Ghost Shadows, and then kind of in the center of the board I have my Knights of the Sacred Scythe, and with them is my General, Father York Durin. Next to them are Ullr's Followers, 23 Flagellants, and then next to them is the unlucky 13th Cohort, which is just a block of Halberdiers with the War Banner. And in them I have 2 characters. I have Radar the Raven, which is an Inquisitor with the Axe of Battle, and Barrack the Grim, which is a BSB. I also have Gillian on the Coach of Ullr, which is in the back corner, or back part of this picture. That's the Arcane Engine that gives lightning reflexes. In front of the cohort, I have the 10 Skirmishing Hunters, and next to them I have the Grave Diggers, which is just a heavy infantry block. And the far left, I have the Pale Riders, which are just 5 knights with great weapons. And then up on the hill, I have my cannon, which you can see in this picture, the Siren Scream. And then outside of this picture is the Banshee's Wail, which is the Mortar. So for magic, my opponent had quite a bit of spells. So between his 3 casters, he had the Fountain of Youth, the Oaken Throne, Spirit of the Woods, Stone Skin, and Awaken the Beast, Swarm of Insects, Pounding Drumbeat, and Totemic Summons. Alright, so as we were deploying back and forth, I ended up dropping all my army about halfway through, so I got the first turn. So I declared a charge with my Pale Knights into the 5 Chameleons over here on the far left flank, and I made that charge. In shooting, my mortar managed to hit and kill quite a few of these skinks with the Skink Priest of Druidism. I was hoping that I would be able to cause a panic test and have them flee off the board because my opponent's General and BSB were on the far side of the board. So I was hoping if I caused enough wounds, even in cold-blooded with leadership 6, they would flee. But unfortunately, my opponent did pass his break test, or panic test. And then over on the far right, I actually hit the Stegosaur and did 3 wounds to that. I don't actually have any pictures of combat. This is actually my opponent's turn. So on the far left, my knights easily managed to wipe out the Chameleons, and then I chased them because my objective for this particular turn was to get a scoring unit into my opponent's deployment zone. So I chased hoping that I would catch them into my opponent's deployment zone. Unfortunately, I was just short, so I didn't quite achieve that goal. So on my opponent's turn, you can see that they kind of moved up. I moved my Ghost Shadows kind of behind the forest. They were initially in line of sight of both the General and the BSB. I was hoping that he'd maybe charge with one, because it's Frenzy, it would, hit them and then run off the board, so it'd be pretty much tied up for at least 3 turns of the game. But he decided not to go after that and just kind of moved his Chameleons around to start shooting. In the center of the board, my opponent moved up, as you can see here. On the far left, where those 10 Saurus Warriors are, they ended up charging my Knights. I elected to flee, hoping I would roll slightly below average and not flee off the table, but unfortunately I did roll high and ran off the table. Other than that, my opponent had some shooting, but most of it was out of range this turn, so I didn't have too much for shooting. So that brings us to the Pale Company turn 2. You can see my readers kind of moved around. I think he managed to kill one with his shooting last turn, but they luckily didn't have to make a panic test. And then I elected that this turn was time for me to start moving up. My opponent had quite a bit of shooting, and it was going to be coming into range, so I figured I had to start pressing the advantage, which was a great idea because in my shooting phase, both my mortar and my cannon rolled ones. They both misfired, and then I rolled ones again, so they were both out for the rest of the game on the same turn. So I ended up rolling 4 ones right in a row for both artillery pieces. So at this point, I was really starting to get annoyed with artillery. In the previous game, both my artillery had pretty much misfired and been destroyed early on, and in this time, both of them misfired on turn 2 and were out of the game completely. So I'm definitely annoyed with artillery at this point throughout the tournament. So that brings us to Saurian Ancient turn 2. So you can see that the two Carnosaur characters start moving around the side of the hill, and the rest just kind of start moving up to try to take care of my readers. He moved the Spearbacks and the Salamanders, so they will in range. They can start shooting at my lines. So you can see how that. You can see, I think the Spearback shot at my hunters and managed to kill 6 of them, but they did manage to pass the panic test, luckily. And then here's just an overall picture of what the board looks like at the end of Saurian Ancient turn 2. And this is kind of the right side. So in shooting and or magic, my opponent managed to, I think, kill the Ghost Riders completely. He might have just caused a few wounds and I fed my panic test and ran off the board, but I think he actually just managed to kill, between magic and shooting, the entire unit. Alright, so that brings us to the Pale Company turn 2. So I had already taken quite a few casualties from the Salamanders on my Halberdiers. They had killed like 10 or 12 Halberdiers, so I really needed to get those out of the way. So I elected to charge my Knights into the Salamanders. They fled, so then I redirected it into the Spearbacks. And Spearbacks have to stand and shoot, so they stand and shoot, and I think killed one of my Knights, but I did make that charge. I just moved the rest of my troops kind of towards the left, kind of going after the weaker side of my opponent's field, and then I used my Flagellants, or my Followers of Uller, as basically a wall, to basically sacrifice them to build a wall so that my opponent, when he came charging in with his Carnosaurs, wouldn't be unable to get into my back lines. In close combat, my Knights easily managed to kill the Spearbacks and overran into the Tower Soar. So hopefully I can kill the Tower Soar. I mean, my guys are strength 5, plus I have my General, which is also strength 5 with 3 attacks. So I'm hoping maybe I can get a few wounds off on that and either break it or just kill it outright. I also did quite well in my magic phase, so I got quite a few spells off. So you can see I have the Stars of the Lion off on my Followers of Uller, and I got Scrying off, I think, in the bubble. So all my units in that kind of square are -1 to hit. So that was really helpful. So that brings us to Saurian Ancient turn 3. So he charged the his General and the block of Star Swears into my Followers of Uller. Based on where his BSP was, he couldn't quite see the Flagellants, so he just kind of moved him around to go after my Knights, as you can kind of see in the top right of this picture. And then he also managed to rally the Salamanders from last turn. He kind of threw his Spearbacks to kind of chaff up my line so that he could continue getting more shooting on me. Alright, and then we went into combat. I think he did shoot. I think he, again, took off another 10 or so of my Halberdiers, so my Halberdiers are really starting to take quite a few casualties. I think he shot and killed a couple of my Gravediggers, but other than that, not too bad. In close combat with the Flagellants, I ended up losing quite a few, but enough that I could still keep in combat. I managed to put, it looks like, 1 wound on his General and killed off 5 of the Star Swearers, so not as bad as it could have been. I wish they would have done a little bit better, but not bad. In big news, however, you can see that my Knights managed to kill and break the Tower Soar. So my opponent killed 1 of my Knights. In return, I only did a couple wounds, but my opponent rolled bad for his break test, and he had the BSP, but he just rolled bad both times and ended up breaking. So I managed to chase him down and then catch him and kill him, which was a huge swing in my favor. So that brings us to Pale Company turn 4. So I charged the um, spearbacks with my gravediggers. I was in their flank, so my opponent elected to flee. So that opened up the pathway between my halberdiers and the Sarswarriors, so I declared a charge there. And then I kind of moved up, as you can see, with my chariot. My archers are just kind of trying to chaff slash shoot the salamanders, but they're really not doing too much. And then in close combat, I managed to easily, I think I killed 8 of the 10 Sarswarriors. They broke. I chased, but did not catch them, and just overran what you can see here. This picture was actually taken on my opponent's turn, so you can see he rallied his spearbacks and moved his salamanders around to get the flank of my halberdiers. In close combat with the flagellants, which I don't have a picture of, I killed the rest of his Sarswarriors and put a couple more wounds on his general. I just have a few followers of Uller left, but enough that kept his general tied up. In his magic phase, he managed to get off the totemic summons and bring a creature into my backlines to go charging into my cannon, which was useless, so I guess he'll pick up those points. And then over here on the right, he kind of started swinging around to bring his troops so he could start shooting and whittling down my knights. And then, yeah, so this is what it looked like. So it looks like I didn't lose quite as many flagellants as I thought I did, but I did manage to kill the rest of my opponent's Sarswarriors. It looks like he maybe has 2 wounds on his general now, so I just put 1 more wound on it, I guess, last turn. But I'm still standing there. I also managed to get Scrying and the Stars of Lion off on my previous turn, so they're both helping immensely keep the followers of Uller around. So in my turn, I charged the Halberdiers into the fleeing Sarswarriors, so they fled off the board. I charged my Gravediggers and my Chariot into the Spearback, which I think shot at the... I charged with my Gravediggers first, so he shot and killed a couple of those guys, and then charged with my Knights. I also elected to charge the rear of the Salamanders with my Archers. I was hoping that if I did the Spearback combat first, then I could maybe overrun into the flank of the Salamanders and kill a few. And then over here on the right, I just kind of continued kind of moving around to get in the front. I don't really want to get my Knights into combat with either of those big dinosaurs. I think the red one is injured, so if preferably, I guess, that one, but I mean, if I get a charge, it would be okay, but 2 beasts into my front would probably not be a good for my Knights. In combat, the Totemic Summons is still beating on my cannon. I think he managed to put 1 wound on it this turn. Luckily, I did manage to hold, I think. Alright, and then at the end of close combat, my followers of Uller finally died to my opponent's general. I did, however, manage to put a couple more wounds on it, so he's just clinging to his last wound. So in Saurian Ancient turn 5, he elected to charge his general into my Gravediggers, which had just kind of realigned. And then you can see my Halberdiers reformed last turn, and my Chariot actually, I think, is in the... No, I don't think my Chariot managed to charge the flank of the Salamanders because he hit one of his... I hit my own unit, so I couldn't finish that charge. You do see I do happen to have 1 Archer who did remain, so he's kind of just holding up the Salamanders at least, so they won't be shooting me. And then over here on the right side, my opponent chaffed up my Knights with his Chameleons and just kind of moved his Skinks around to start shooting at my Knights. In close combat, he put 2 more wounds on the cannon, but it's still alive, and I think it passed its break test, surprisingly. He moved his Skinks into just my deployment zone. The card he had for this turn was to get a scoring unit into my opponent's deployment zone, so he ended up getting a token. At this point, we're on turn 5, so I think my opponent has 4 tokens, and I have 2 tokens, so my opponent is definitely beating me on the secondary objectives. I think in close combat over here, I challenged with my champion, and my opponent stomped my champion into the ground. But luckily I did hold, because I was steadfast and I had a BSB reroll. Yeah, so the 2 beasts just kind of moved up so that they could maybe charge next turn. So that brings us to Pale Company turn 6. So I charged the Chameleons with my Knights just to get them out of the way and grab a few points. I charged my Halberdiers into the Salamanders, and just basically moved my Chariot out so that it was within 6 inches of both and couldn't be overrun by the general. So in close combat, my opponent did quite a few wounds, but luckily I was still steadfast and held with my gravediggers. You can also see I killed the salamanders and reformed with my halberdiers. Not the best reform, so if I would have broken with my gravediggers, my opponent actually might have been able to pursue into my halberdiers. So that's probably not the best reform I could have done, but oh well. And then other news, so over here on my opponent's turn, I easily killed the salamanders, or the chameleons, and then reformed to just basically be as far away from the two monsters as I could be. So on my opponent's turn, he declared a charge with both of them, and luckily only the BSB got in. So in close combat, I just challenged with my champion. He easily killed my champion, but my guys were stubborn and easily held, which was good. But in big news, over here, my little militia, or heavy infantry, managed to put 1 wound on the countersword, which only had 1 wound left, and he failed to save. So one of those militia has now earned himself a knight title, because he managed to kill the enemy general. So that was a huge swing of points on the very last turn of the game, so that was really helpful. So this is the last picture, so we started adding up points. So my opponent ended up getting 1853 out of me. I got 2780 out of him, more or less. I don't remember the exact score sheet, so I've kind of had to do this from memory. So these could be off, so I do apologize about that. So in the scenario, that would make it a 10-4, and then the 6 secondary objectives. As I said, my opponent got 4, and I only managed to get 2. So that brought my opponent to a total of 8 for this battle, and gave me a total of 12. So it's a Pale Company victory. It's not a very big victory. It's only 12-8, but it's still a victory. So I will take it. It's quite a bit better than my massacre of my first game. This was a really fun game. I played this opponent last year and I really enjoyed playing him. And I played him again this year and it's again really fun playing him. I think the most frustrating thing for this particular game was both my artillery misfiring on the second game. That really hurt. I had all these targets I could shoot with my cannon, and my cannon just blew itself up. So that was really frustrating. For MVP, I got to give the MVP to either my wizard, because he was just getting buffs left and right, or my followers of Uller, because they formed that wall, and they put 4 wounds off of the general, which allowed my gravediggers to pluck off that final wound. And they managed to hold up his general for like three turns. So they were probably the MVP. They really survived. But the wizard did give them that extra bonus to help them survive. But overall, it was a great game. So this was game 2. So I have 3 more games. This managed to bring me up a little bit from my first defeat. So that was good. So that threw me up to another Saurian Ancient player, actually. So look forward to that in game 3. If you guys saw any comments or mistakes or anything, please put those in the comment section below. As always, hit like and subscribe, and as always, game on!